What is up, guys? This is Odd Job Entertainment, bringing you another video with a slick new intro that'll be sure to get me more subs, am I right? Today I've got something pretty special for you guys. I've been baking up some hot new physics calculators for all you elite airsoft LARPerators. We're going to run through some scenarios and see what the gods of science have to say about them, assuming I didn't screw up somewhere. So, scenario 1. You walk by a bush. See? There's a bush that suddenly starts shooting at you. It turns out that the bush is actually a sniper. And because you are a wholesome individual, you say, "Gee whirlikers, that goober's gun is shooting a tad hot for my liking." You bring it up to the admin in between games because you are wholly concerned for the safety of the event and not just upset that you got owned by a bush. The admin pulls the bush sniper aside and has them re-chrono their gun, and nothing is awry. How can this be? Man, there's nothing sexier than a spreadsheet. But how does this carnal temptation help us explain this airsofting paradox? Well, the first possibility is your admins or field are using archaic rules based solely on BB weight. This is bad and really pretty stupid. It is far and away better to use joules or energy as the basis of measuring, and this is why. On this first page, we see how joules change dramatically based on the weight used for chronoing. If all the admins are doing is checking velocity, and all these guns report the same initial velocity, the results are a huge gap between the airsoft guns of Wally World and the super-tuned sniper rifle face bleeders. So diving a bit more into the math here, the basic calculation for energy is 1/2 times the mass times velocity squared. And the energy for each of these cells is being calculated that way. And then the calculation for speed over distance is being calculated with this guy, which is a derivation of the force of air resistance and how it affects final speed. I did not come up with this wholly on myself. I used some help from Stack Exchange, which is how most people get their math done. But what we can see is if a Wally World gun shooting 0.12 gram BBs starts at an initial speed of 150 meters per second, which is roughly 500 meters per second, then we see, actually, let me update this real quick. Yeah. So if our initial speed is 150 meters per second, then roughly that equates to a FPS of 500. After just 2 meters, or for us using freedom units, it's a little more than 6 feet. And the reason why this is all in metric is because doing it in the Imperial system really sucks, and I do not like it. So we're sticking with metric for the most of this. But we see that after 2 meters, it has already lost 20 meters per second. Pretty big difference. Whereas our sniper, using the 0.4 gram BBs, has only lost 6 meters per second. That means that your Wally World gun is already down to just 1 joule of energy, whereas the sniper using the 0.4 gram BB is still shooting with 4 joules of energy. Now, this is obviously a little unrealistic for airsoft guns. I've never run into an airsoft sniper that can shoot with that much energy, but I'm sure that there is some crazed psycho, probably in Russia, who is manufacturing these face bleeders and selling them off to little children to watch the chaos. But regardless, the math still points out that the sniper with their 0.4 gram BB is having significantly more energy at impact. And we take this to the far extremes, and we go out to 18 meters, pretty typical engagement distance if you play out in the woods. That 0.12 gram BB is barely floating in the air, whereas the 0.4 gram BB is still flying high. The 0.12 gram BB hits with 0.12 joules of energy, and the sniper still hits with 2 joules of energy. Now, this is a more typical impact energy. Actually, 2 joules is pretty standard. And you can see that as we go further and further down the graph, the gap gets bigger and bigger. And that's matched up, or that is supported by this graph here. We see here that the heavier BB, this brown line here, maintains more of its speed over a longer distance than the much lighter weight BB, this 0.12. Now there's a little bit of a cluster here because the more popular weights all tend to gather around the same size. You got 0.2, 0.23, 0.25, 0.28, 3, etc., right? But the basic correlation that we can see here is as BB weight increases, velocity is maintained a further distance down the field. And that equates to a greater energy at impact. And this is one of the principal reasons why I am so adamant when I talk to field admins and people in charge of airsofting events that they have to use joules as a measurement of force of the BB, because velocity simply does not cut it. It allows huge disparities in impact energy, and that impact energy is ultimately what is going to make your face bleed and make the little kids not want to come to play with us anymore. And as a quick side note, I will be making this spreadsheet available to anyone who wants it. You will find a link down in the description, and I think you will find the second page particularly interesting. I ask that you don't touch these variables unless you know what you're doing, but this second page can be used to calculate your impact energy simply by changing these variables up here. It's formatted to use freedom units, so you simply type in your FPS here and it will update the chart accordingly. So if you are curious as to how much energy your gun will have at impact from any given distance, you can do so with this chart. All right, guys, this third graph I'm really proud of. There's a lot of really slick color coordination going on here. And this third graph helps us understand a second scenario, which is probably more likely. As time has gone on, more fields are switching over to using a joule-based measurement system for calculating the velocity for your muzzle. It's a much safer system and provides better results overall, but there is still room for those false hot gun claims. And we'll look at a scenario here. Let's go back to that you're an elite SWAT operator and you get shot by that random bush from about 10 meters away, which is about 25 feet. And if you were to have shot that bush, you would be hitting with 93 meters per second with your projectile, as assuming you are using a 0.2 gram BB, which is the most common weight, whereas the sniper is hitting you with 81 meters per second. But wait, that's less. It shouldn't be hitting as hard, right? Well, actually, you're wrong. Your projectile hits with 0.88 joules of energy, whereas our sniper friend hits with 1.33 joules of energy. That is 66% more energy at impact. So what is going on? Well, if we look at this graph here, this top one, we see that you, the yellow line, no, the orange line, this guy, you start with a greater speed, but your speed diminishes much faster than our heavier weight friend, the brown line. You can see here, those lines cross, and then the brown is maintaining more of its speed over a greater distance. But how does that compare to the energy reading? Well, if we look down here, we see that even though the 0.4 gram BB has a lower speed, since you all started with the same energy, we can see very clearly that the 0.4 gram BB is maintaining more of that energy over a greater distance. It is less affected by air resistance. Whereas your 0.2 gram BB, this guy here, you lose your energy very quickly. Now, I personally became very interested in these kinds of scenarios because as soon as I switched to HPA for events, I noticed that I started getting a lot more hot gun accusations. Well, I also switched to a heavier weight BB at the same time, and I use 0.28s or 0.3s. And so I wanted to investigate what was going on because I'm an honorable player, and I was measuring with joules with my admins before each event. And my admins know me very well. They have no concerns about me trying to up my PSI, for example, while I'm on the field. Nevertheless, these hot gun claims came against me all the time. So I wanted to look into the physics behind what was going on and find out what it is. So part of that is there is an inherent bias against HPA users from non-HPA users. Since it is a superior platform, people are a little hesitant to want to let that one slide when they get hit by my silent mouse fart gun. But with that increased attention, it really just means that you are more likely to notice that, hey, wait a minute, I'm not cheating. My gun is tuned right to the rules. I follow the letter of the law, bucko. So it really made me curious to see what was going on. So I did the math, figured out what the air resistance was, and sure enough, it wasn't so much that I was using HPA since it has the same joules, but because I was using that heavier 0.3 gram BB, I was shooting a lot hotter at distance compared to my lighter weight 0.2 gram BB friends. I was at certain ranges having more speed, but definitely more energy every single time. So what does this mean? Is there a perfect set of rules that can account for all of these variables? Well, really, no. But I think the important thing is as long as the rules are sensible enough and don't allow absurd things like 4-joule guns onto the field, you just need to keep in mind that there are these variables that affect the impact energy and don't get bent out of shape when it feels like you get hit with a BB that's shooting a little hot. Remember, you went to an event where you intended to get shot. So it doesn't really make sense to complain when you get shot. But anyways, you guys know what to do. Do all the YouTube things, like, share, comment, subscribe, and let me know what you think. Until next time, this is Odd Job Entertainment, signing off.